Yeah, so the first question is, if you think of the experience of Central and Eastern Europe over the past several decades, right? In many respects, 3 decades really. In 1989 was the global hope for democracy. Led to a series of peaceful uprisings that really brought in democracy throughout the European continent. And now there's a bit of question about commitment to democracy in several countries and a bit of a retrenchment. So the question is, beyond looking at the region itself, what can the global community learn from the experience of this region with democracy over the last 3 decades?
Well, early in the 1990s, when I was fresh out of university, a celebrated, well-known professor of sociology, Sir Ralph Dahrendorf, visited Hungary, and he gave an interview. It was about 92. And he said, everybody believes that it's going to be a quick and linear transformation from communism to market-based democracy. But he said, to change the political system, it takes 6 months. To change the economy, it takes 6 years. But to change society, it takes 60 years. So we are in year 28 now. And contrary to the very hopes of my generation at the time, it's not a linear and quick evolution. It's okay. Should we start again?
Yes, please.
From the very beginning, or?
Oh, just the last.
Okay. So contrary to the hopes of my generation, it wasn't a fast and linear catch-up to the West. Instead, it has become a very zigzagged development route with huge periods of falling back or slipping back. And currently, some of the countries, including mine, are in a zag after a long zig. And I hope that we will return to this linear path of development. The problem is also that coming out of the Soviet-ruled communist bloc, for our countries, unlike the Arab Spring countries, for our countries there was immediately a very relevant example to follow and catch up to, and that was the European Union. And for many years that was a goal to achieve, and it was a motivating factor for the people in our countries. However, where we wanted to catch up to is also in crisis and trouble. So that helps those who want to question these goals to argue that we don't want to belong, we don't want to join a crisis zone, as they often say. So it would be very helpful if the European Union sorts out its problems and continues to develop and become an attractive target again.
And speaking of the European Union, you have different theories of why the European Union is in crisis. In some respect, it moved too far, too fast to integrate, and you have a whole other argument that it didn't move fast enough, right? That the fiscal union didn't come, and then obviously you have this immigration and refugee crisis going on. How do you see the situation of the European Union now, and where does it need to go to return to the path, if not of further integration, but of stabilization?
Well, the European Union is a unique historic experiment which had different phases. Originally, the European Union's raison d'être, reason to exist, was to avoid the next World War. Having gone into 2 world wars before, the founding fathers of the European Union thought that that's the main objective. It was very quickly achieved to create common interest and reduce the possibility of the next war to close to zero. So then there was a new reason to exist for the European Union, and that was to create the special, unique European model of the social market economy, of the welfare state, which is quite different from the US or the Asian model of capitalist democracy. That was again very successful, created a lot of welfare for the European population in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and also enlarged the European Union. And then in the 90s, it gained a new purpose, and that was to extend the borders of Europe back into the whole and free European Union, including those countries coming in from the East in the post-Soviet period. And that was also achieved very successfully Some people quoted Catherine the Great, the Tsarin of Russia, in the 1990s again, saying, "I cannot protect my border but to expand them." And that's what the European Union did. Some say overreaching. I think rightly reaching out as far as they could. And then from the 2000s, talking about current issues, the European Union has gained a new reason to exist, and that is to protect the European way of life in the face of globalization. Europe has lost much of its competitiveness in the face of the emerging Asia, especially China. Europe could not catch up in competitiveness to the United States. And Europe, with its decision-making model, has turned out to be a bit slow. And also, because of the consensus-based decision-making model, Europe had a strong tendency of solving only one side of the problem. The politicians of at the end, 28 countries always did the next step that was popular politically, but always forgot to do the unpopular part, so created suboptimal solutions. Let me give you 3 examples which lead to the problems of today. The founding fathers of the Maastricht Treaty in the early 90s, Mitterrand, Kohl, created the Eurozone, which is a monetary union, but they have forgotten to create a fiscal union, which is the logical other part of an economic integration. Then they also created the Schengen zone of free internal travel without drawing strong external borders around the European Union, thereby creating another crisis. A country cannot be sovereign, cannot keep its sovereignty if it cannot control its borders. And the third thing, we have created a common foreign policy, but we forgot to create a common defense and security policy. So these are all half-legged or half-armed giants, these policies, and they cannot be sustained without the other side being added. So in the aftermath of the financial crisis, these missing elements of these major integration steps have to be delivered somehow by the current leaders. And if you think about the biggest problems of Europe today, these are exactly those unresolved problems. We have an unfinished economic integration, which separates the northern side of Europe from the southern side of Europe. We have an unfinished integration of our immigration and border control system, which opens up Europe to a migration which it cannot control, and that threatens the identity of European people. Even if migration is now down to 5% what it used to be 2 years ago, still the identity crisis is there. And thirdly, we have a security threat strengthening from the east, from Russia, to a distant degree from Turkey, also by the US trying to pull out or questioning the reason of NATO. So Europe has to find a solution to the security issue as well. If Europe will be able to find the answers to these 3 problems, it will answer the most urgent issues for people, and then it will prove that it's reason to exist, which is, in one word, Europe is a kind of Noah's Ark in the flood of globalization. So for the people of Europe to survive, they need to go in this Noah's Ark. Jumping off is a bad idea, talking about Brexit. And also questioning the direction of the ship, questioning the reason for this Noah's Ark to swim is also a bad idea, because everybody can swim. But we need to steer this ship very well and to a safe harbor pretty soon.
You talked in the session today, and I agreed with you, by the way, that for most people, democracy is not an ends, but a means. Sorry, not a means, but an ends. And of course, in a period where democracy is seen by many people not delivering the ends, they may fall prey to authoritarian models that promise the ends. But as a practitioner, and as someone of great experience, you of course have to balance the ends and the means. So how can the democratic system, not just in Europe or even Central Eastern Europe, but around the world, deliver better results, but also keep those core values and those core means on the way there?
Well, democracy is challenged because democracy recently in the developed world hasn't produced good results for people. The vast majority of people perceive, and that's an important word, perceive that democracy is not solving their issues of identity, of security, and of social economic status. So democracy can legitimize itself long-term only if it is delivering solutions. If not, if people fear of losing their status or being or losing their identity or being attacked by terrorists or other countries, then they will look for protection. As Master Yoda says in Star Wars, fear is the road to the Master Yoda says in Star Wars that fear is the path to the dark side, because from fear comes anger, and from anger comes hate, and hate is the road to suffering. Now, many politicians are actually harvesting the insecurity that people in the developed countries feel after the crisis. These politicians are harvesting, and they are trying to generate fear. They generate the perception of threat, and then they put their hands up and say, I'm going to protect you. Social media and the modern digital communication is helping this kind of communication, because instead of facts, you have much more perceptions and feelings. And many, as I said, malevolent politicians are actually harvesting the potential that's in these gut reactions of people. So I think those who want to sustain democracy need to do several things. They need to adapt to the communication challenge presented by social media, data, and the collapse of the respect for traditional journalism. But in a broader sense, democratic politicians and centrist politicians and political parties need to deliver real practical solutions that dissipate those fears. So they need to help middle classes in those societies feel stable, strong. Because the basis of every democracy, as Aristotle has written 2,500 years ago, the heart of every democratic society is a strong middle class. You need wide and strong middle classes who have something to lose, and therefore they resist radical and threatening ideas. But to stabilize middle classes, show them a new purpose. For families to come back to the feeling of the last 70 years that the next generation, my children's generation, will be better off than myself. That would be a stabilizing factor. Unless we can reach that, we will be easily prey to those politicians who want to harvest the potential in fear, and also those external forces who want to go for the Achilles heel of democracy and try to manipulate it from the outside in order to ruin democracy and then expand their authoritarian power.
And one final question, since you brought up your children and the next generation, which is, of course, many divides happening, those who move forward and those who are left behind, those inside the system, those out. But one is a big generational divide in a lot of the democratic world. And as you look into the next generation, as they're beginning to become politically involved, both what wisdom, Yoda-like, would you pass on to them, and what are the hopes and fears you see in them? There's beginning to be more questioning of democracy from them, just as they're starting to get in. So speaking to them, what should they be on the lookout for?
Well, I think every young generation, when I was 20 years old, I had the same question the elite and the status quo. I don't think they question democracy. I think they question the ruling elite. If they see it that it is corrupt, directly or symbolically, then they will question it. They want new solutions, and they want people who understand what they want. But they don't question democracy. They probably want more democracy, using the digital technology actually enables them to express their feeling, their opinion, their fears, and their wishes more openly and more actively. So that's very important, that we shouldn't see it as a questioning of democracy. We should see it as a request for more democracy and less rigid democracy. The second is education. You cannot have stable democracy without an educated middle class. And we need to have education which is also teaching people their citizens' rights and citizens' obligations. So to increase the participation in our democratic system. For example, even with mandatory voting participation. And also not just through coercion, but through interest to create more active participation in local society is crucial. But there is also a new element which didn't exist in the world a couple of decades ago. Many of our problems can only be dealt with at the global level. So nation states are the strongest identity formations and will last in the visible future. But many of the nation states cannot solve their problems alone. Not just the European Union is example to that. Climate change, global finance, tax avoidance, nuclear armament are just a few examples of how certain problems cannot be dealt with at the national level. Therefore, we need a stronger global governance, and we need to find the right place for every decision to be decided. Some things have to be decided more at the city level, some at the national level, and some at the global level. And we need to legitimize those decisions. Because today there is a huge distance between the individual's will and the decision and the accountability of that decision that is made. And digital technologies can help that or can ruin that. And for those forces who want more democracy to survive, they need to very quickly be able to adapt the digital world and keep democracy surviving within the framework of the digital challenge.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm trying to think of. Well, I think it was pretty.
No, it's good.
Right. Okay, good.
Wonderful. Thank you for the
Thank
time.
you. Sure.
Go and enjoy the lake.
I will. Thank you very much.